Hey everybody, and welcome to part 4 of this tutorial series where I'm showing you how to integrate the Events Calendar plugin with the Genesis theme framework. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to customize your sidebars on events-related pages in Genesis, basically setting up custom sidebars for the events list, single events, single event days, and event venues. Alright, so one of the first things I'm going to do is go back to my code editor, Sublime Text 2, and I'm going to go into my child themes functions.php file that we've been working with. And right at the end of my functions.php file, underneath the modify titles code that we are working with, I'm going to create a couple new lines, and I'm going to paste in some code for registering some new sidebars. And basically all this chunk of code does is set up some markup for each of the widgets. So before the widget, after the widget, before the title, after the title, just setting the markup for each one of those elements in our widgets. And then right below that, I'm using a number of register sidebar functions to register sidebars to be used conditionally in a couple different spots. So the first sidebar I'm just registering for our events list. The next sidebar is for single events. The sidebar after that is for single event days. And then the last sidebar is just for single venues. So I've got 4 here. Feel free to copy this register sidebar function and create as many other sidebars as you want. So that's pretty much it for registering new sidebars. And now I'm going to add another function for removing the default sidebars on only the events pages. What this block of code will do is basically remove the default sidebars if we're on any of the events or venues, so basically any of the events calendar plugin related pages. And then I'm going to add a final chunk of code for conditionally inserting our custom sidebars. So we registered our sidebars and we conditionally removed all of the default sidebars on all the event related pages, and now all we need to do is conditionally insert those sidebars. And to do that, I'm using very similar conditional code to what I've used for some of the other functions like the Genesis post titles, and also the breadcrumbs that we were working with earlier. So basically, just running through this insert sidebars function, I'm checking to see if we're on the events list page, and if we are, I'm telling it to insert our event list sidebar. If that first condition is not true, check for another condition if we're on the single events page. And if we are, then insert the single events sidebar. And if that's not true, check if we're on a single event day. And if that's true, insert the event day sidebar. And if that's not true, check to see if we're on a single venue page. And if we are, then use the venue sidebar. So that's basically it. That's all the functionality that you need to put in your functions.php file to work with custom sidebars on your different event-related pages. So let's go back to our actual website administration, and if I go to Appearance and Widgets, I should see new sidebar areas that we registered. So I've got those 4 right here, and I've got in the events list sidebar, I've got a just the mini calendar widget, which I'm going to give a title of there quick. And if we go back to our events site, and if I go to events list, I should see that mini calendar widget. So that's working. And if I go back to the admin, and let's say for single events, I want to have a search at top, and right below that, I'm going to use an upcoming events widget. So that's already in there. So if I click into a single event, sure enough, I've got my website search and the upcoming events widget, so that's working for single events. Collapse this sidebar. And then for single event days, let's actually put in one more widget in there. Let's put an events calendar as well. Give it that title, save, and then if I go back to my website, and I'm going to go into the calendar and then click on a day where there's an event, I should see my website search and my specific mini calendar on event days that I added there. So that's working for single event days. If I go back to my dashboard, the last sidebar that we created is for single venues, and I've just got a next event widget in there. So let's go to, actually this event has a venue, so let's go into this Rockin' Spot venue, and sure enough, I've got my next event widget in there with my event listed. So that's pretty much it for customizing sidebars for your events calendar plugin related pages in the Genesis theme framework. All right, just a couple other things that I want to clean up here before we wrap up that I noticed while going through a couple of these screens, and you probably did yourself. For our next event widget, you can see here that the styling is not looking too good. The text is right up against the side of the widget, so let's fix that. And if I go back to my events list, I noticed that the buttons here are getting cut off, so let's fix that. And the other thing is in the mini calendar widget, it's sort of duplicating this background that it's applying to widget titles right here, and also putting a line underneath there, so let's get rid of that as well. Alright, so I'm going to inspect this next event widget element just to take a look at which class or selector we can latch onto. And right here I can see that here's my full widget, and it's got a class of tribe events feature widget. So I'm just going to copy that class name to be able to latch onto. And then let me see. So within the widget, we've got our standard widget wrap, and then we've got the widget title. So basically, our event stuff is all below that. There's the event class, the when class, the location class, which we don't have in the widget, and then the event body, which is just the text of the event. So there's those four classes: event, when, location, LOC, and event underscore body. So let me go back to Sublime Text 2, and I'm going to go into my child themes event.css file, which this is just an override file of the events calendar plugin's default event.css file, which if you missed in the previous steps in this tutorial, all you have to do if you want to modify the event calendar plugin's CSS file, you can find that in plugins, the events calendar, resources, and then events.css. Just make a copy of that file, and in your child theme put that events.css copy into an events folder, and any changes that you make in that events.css file will override the plugin's version of that CSS, and the next time you update the plugin, your changes won't be lost. So your changes will basically stay there forever. So in my child themes events.css file, I'm just going to add a new line here right at the bottom. And let's see, the first class for the event is just event. So event, when, LOC, and event body. So I'm just going to create selectors for each one of those classes, and I'm going to apply the same um, declaration to each one of those classes, so I don't have to, you know, do them all separately on separate lines, applying the same thing to each one of them separately. And I'm going to give each one of those a margin, a 10 pixel margin on the left. So I'm going to save and then go back to my website, refresh, and there we go. I've got a 10 pixel margin on the left of all those elements, and that looks a lot better. The other thing I'll do here real quick is I'll just increase the size of the title here. So the title is just an A element within my event div. So to target that, I'm going to try to be fairly specific here. So I'm going to create a new line, and I'm going to create, just use basically the same selector where I'm targeting the event div and then the A element within that event div, because I'm not going to have any other A elements within that event div. It's pretty safe. And let's set the font size of that to 15 pixels, and I suppose we can make it bold too. Save and go back to your website, and bingo, that looks a lot better. So we've got a little bit more definition with our event title. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing we were going to fix is the buttons getting cut off on the events list page. So let's go back there. Let me close my inspector just for a second. So you can see the buttons are getting cut off right here. And that's a pretty easy fix. So let me just inspect this element and see what's going on here. And I actually already know what's going on. In the Genesis theme, we've got a overflow hidden style being set on our entry content div, and if I toggle that off right now, you can see the overflow being visible again. And if I toggle that back on, it's hidden. So let's get rid of that, and all we have to do for that is basically just override this declaration. We're not actually going to remove it; it's going to stay there. But if I go back to Sublime Text 2 or my code editor, and underneath the next event widget code that we added before, this is one handy thing that I didn't talk about before, but one thing that's really helpful in CSS is taking a look at your body classes. Your body classes are going to contain different classes, typically dynamically set per page. So for example, if you're on a website page, you'll have page in the body class, or if you're on a blog page, it'll actually say post, or it'll give you the title of that particular blog post. Or we're on the events list page, and I have events -list set here, and events archive. And all of these, basically what they allow you to do is latch on to that class in your CSS to set specific CSS for those specific pages. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to latch on to the events list class that I've got. So go back to my CSS here and do events list, and that overflow hidden property is being applied to our entry content div. So I'm just going to set overflow to visible. And this actually involves CSS specificity. If you don't know what that is, I highly recommend checking out some articles on that on the web. But basically what that is since in the original declaration for the overflow hidden, I just have one class name, and now I'm using two class names. That bumps this declaration above the previous declaration, no matter what, unless I do something like set that other declaration to important, but this will actually trump that since it doesn't have importance set. So let me go back to my website, refresh, and now that overflow is gone. The final CSS modification that I wanted to make is in our mini calendar widget. I've got this background and border being applied to these elements inside the widget. So we don't want that. I'm going to right click and inspect element. And let's see what's happening here. I can see right here in the themes base style sheet, in our widget area div, which I have set right here for the whole sidebar, any H4 element is going to get a background color of white smoke and a border bottom of 1 pixel solid DDD. So let's get rid of that as well. And what we can do to get rid of that is actually we can latch on to this style that we declared before on line 450 right here, because it's above this declaration, so that means it's basically trumping this. So let's go to line 450 in our events.css file, and I see that declaration right here. I'm going to set a background of none and border of 0, save that, go back to my website, refresh, and that's cleared up as well. And if I wanted to, I could also change the padding on that as well, because a top and bottom padding and left and right padding is being applied. We'll keep the left and right because that actually looks good with that padding, but let's get rid of the top and bottom padding because I think there's already enough there anyway. So right back here to this selector that we just applied the changes to, and set the top and bottom padding to 0, and then left and right padding to 10 pixels. I'm just using the shorthand property for padding. If I save and go back to my website and refresh, that padding looks a little bit better. And that concludes this tutorial series. We've covered a lot in these 4 parts. I've showed you how to set up the Events Calendar plugin in Genesis. We took a look at customizing breadcrumbs, page titles in Genesis, sidebars, and some miscellaneous CSS and settings things. So you should be well on your way to making the calendar look even better in the Genesis theme framework. If you have any questions, just feel free to hit us up in the tribe forums or via email or in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer any questions. And I hope everyone's enjoyed this tutorial series. Until next time, thanks.